97% of people use weed wrong and they don't even know it. Not wrong because they're lazy, not wrong because it's illegal, but wrong because they've been sold a cheap high in place of a sacred initiation. For thousands of years, this plant wasn't used to escape life. It was used to awaken from the illusion of it. Ancient mystics, temple priests, and seers didn't pass joints at parties. They prepared, they fasted, they breathed with intention. And when they finally consumed the sacred smoke, they didn't get stoned, they got activated. But that knowledge, erased. What's left is a hollow ritual. Light up, scroll, repeat. We've forgotten what this plant was for. Forgotten that it was once a tool to meet the gods, confront the self, and dissolve the veil. Weed isn't just a drug, it's a mirror. And if used right, it shows you what you really are. Not a body getting high, but a soul waking up. Before the dispensaries, before the rolling papers, before the stoner jokes and weed leaf emojis, there was silence, there was ritual, and there was reverence. Cannabis wasn't always used to numb you. It was once used to know you. Long before modern science caught on, ancient civilizations understood this plant as a sacred threshold. In India, it was called Vijaya, the conqueror, and associated with Shiva, the god of transformation. In Egypt, high priests burned it inside stone chambers to dissolve the boundaries between flesh and divinity. Across Africa, cannabis was infused into initiation rites, and in Hebrew texts, it was part of the holy anointing oil used to mark prophets and kings. Even the Bible whispers the truth. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle and herb for the service of man. Service. This wasn't recreation, it was revelation. But colonization changed everything. The British Raj outlawed it in India to weaken yogic resistance. In America, racist propaganda linked it to crime and madness. And as the war on drugs escalated, a deeper war was unfolding. A war on consciousness itself. Because if a plant could wake people up, it had to be controlled. So they took what was sacred and gave us a sedative. They hijacked a mirror and turned it into a mask. And we, unknowing, lit it up anyway, thinking we were freeing ourselves when really we were fogging the glass. Here's what they don't tell you. Cannabis isn't a universal good. It's a frequency amplifier, meaning it doesn't magically elevate you. It meets you where you are and turns that up. If you're grounded, it deepens your roots. If you're open, it expands your insight. But if you're distracted, anxious, or escaping something, it will amplify that instead. That's why it helped some mystics reach God consciousness and turned others into couch-locked shells. See, ancient cultures understood this. That's why cannabis was never used casually. The setting mattered. The timing mattered. The intention mattered because intention is the spell. Without it, you're not activating anything, you're just numbing the very parts of yourself that are crying out to evolve. And this isn't just spiritual nostalgia. Even neuroscientists now admit the environment, emotion, and expectation surrounding a substance shapes the neurological outcome more than the substance itself. Which means, when you smoke in ritual, you awaken. When you smoke in chaos, you scatter. There's a reason temple smoke carried prayers. Why shamans prepared for days before a ceremony. Why silence preceded every sacred inhale. Because they weren't trying to get out of their minds. They were trying to get in. And that's exactly where we're headed. But before we go deeper, understand this. Some truths are too ancient and too disruptive for YouTube. Join our newsletter using the link in the description to get what we can't say here and receive a free copy of our ebook while it's still available. Now let's go further back, beyond the temples, beyond the smoke, to the biology of awakening. Because what the ancients knew intuitively, modern science is finally starting to prove. Your brain was built to receive this plant. That's not poetic exaggeration, it's biological fact. Deep inside your body is an ancient system scientists only discovered in the 1990s, the endocannabinoid system. It regulates mood, memory, pain, pleasure, even your sense of time and self. And what's wild? Your brain produces its own cannabis-like compounds. Anandamide, named after the Sanskrit word for bliss, is one of them. THC, the main compound in cannabis, mimics these molecules almost exactly, which means when you consume it, you're not introducing something foreign. You're activating something forgotten. This isn't accidental. This is architecture, because when THC enters the brain, it begins to shift the very frequency of your awareness. Studies show it boosts alpha and gamma brainwave activity, states linked to meditation, deep insight, and flow. It temporarily dissolves the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for the ego, the constant inner narrator. Sound familiar? That's the same thing happening during peak psychedelic experiences, mystical visions, and near-death events. In other words, cannabis has the power to quiet the ego and amplify the soul, but only when it's used consciously. When ancient priests used cannabis before rituals, they weren't getting high. They were fine-tuning their perception. They understood that reality isn't fixed. It's filtered. And cannabis? It alters the filter. It loosens the boundaries between senses, collapses time, and expands emotional range. That's why a single moment can feel eternal. That's why sounds become symphonies. Why ordinary thoughts suddenly carry cosmic weight. But here's the catch. All of that depends on the state you're in when you enter. If you're fragmented, the plant will reflect that. If you're aligned, it will reveal more. THC doesn't create wisdom, it reveals what's already there. That's why it's been called a non-specific amplifier of consciousness. You bring the map, it turns on the light, and that's what most people miss. They light up hoping to escape discomfort, but the plant isn't an escape hatch, it's a spotlight. It will show you the walls you've built around your heart, the stories you're looping, the fears you pretend aren't there. That's not a bad trip. That's medicine doing its job, and the science backs this. At UCLA, researchers found cannabis increases activity in the amygdala and hippocampus, the emotional memory centers. This explains why old wounds surface, why forgotten moments resurface in full clarity. Cannabis is not erasing pain. It's resurfacing it so you can see it, feel it, and finally transmute it. It's not a tranquilizer. It's a truth serum. But even this is only the beginning, because hidden in ancient scrolls, mythologies, and coded temple rites, there is a ritual, a sequence, a precise way to use cannabis, not just to alter consciousness temporarily, but to change it permanently. That's what Thoth knew. That's what they buried. And that's what we're about to unearth. In the temples of ancient Chem, what we now call Egypt, there was no separation between science and spirituality. Mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and sacred ritual were one continuum of knowledge, guarded fiercely by an elite priesthood. At the center of this mystery tradition stood Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and magic. Not a mythic cartoon figure, but a symbolic archetype of the initiated mind, the awakened intellect, the scribe of the soul. And according to some lost traditions, Thoth didn't just record wisdom, he encoded it in symbols and geometry and rituals disguised as myth. And one of those rituals used cannabis. It wasn't about getting high. It was a multi-phase process: fasting, breathwork, lunar alignment, and the ceremonial ingestion of the plant, not for relaxation but for revelation. Modern science is now catching up to what these priests already knew. These elements weren't random. They created the precise neurochemical conditions to dissolve ego boundaries and rewire the brain's default mode network, the same part that silences during deep meditation and near-death experiences. The process began with purification, physical cleansing through fasting, typically during a waning moon, reduced digestive noise and sharpened perception. This wasn't superstition. Fasting lowers blood glucose and raises ketone levels, which increases neuroplasticity. It also increases anandamide levels, the body's natural bliss molecule, making the brain more receptive to THC's subtle effects. Then came breath, long-controlled pranayama. Inhalations were synchronized with intention, some say even sacred chants tuned to specific vibrational frequencies. Breathwork, as we now know, shifts the autonomic nervous system from sympathetic fight or flight to parasympathetic rest and integrate. It oxygenates the pineal gland and raises CO2 thresholds, amplifying sensory clarity and inner stillness. Pair that with cannabis and the mind enters a lucid, dreamlike awareness, a state modern neuroscientists call hypnagogia, where visual symbolism and subconscious memories flood in. Then, and only then, came the smoke, not in a crowd, not with music blasting, alone, in silence, sometimes in complete darkness. Why? Because cannabis in isolation combined with fasting and breath begins to act like DMT. It catalyzes endogenous visionary states. Modern fMRI scans show that during such rituals, the brain exhibits decreased blood flow to regions linked with self-referential thought and increased activity in sensory association cortices. The result? A direct experience of unity, of no self, of connection with everything. And then came the part almost no one talks about, the integration. These weren't just peak experiences, they were meant to permanently shift the initiate. After the ritual, the priest didn't just return to daily life. They documented, reflected, and meditated. They aligned their lives with the insight. Because without that, the ritual meant nothing. That's the real reason 97% of people miss the activation. They think the moment is the destination. It's not. It's the door. You still have to walk through it. You still have to remember what you saw when you were high and live it when you're sober. The ritual wasn't meant to be repeated endlessly. It was meant to unlock a permanent shift, a memory, an echo you could return to again and again without needing the plant. This is state-dependent learning, and we'll go deeper into that soon. But first, understand this. Ancient knowledge was never lost. It was buried, hidden in plain sight, written in metaphor, sealed in stone, and now resurfacing through you. You are not just a consumer of cannabis, you are the continuation of a ritual thousands of years old, and the ritual isn't over. The reason most people think weed makes them paranoid is because it makes them honest. Not publicly, internally. It quiets the outer noise so much that what's already inside becomes impossible to ignore. That creeping anxiety, it's not new. That sadness bubbling up, not new. The looped memory you buried 10 years ago, still there. Cannabis doesn't create these feelings, it reveals what you've suppressed. And that's exactly why the ancients saw it as a tool for initiation, not entertainment. In Jungian psychology, there's a concept called the shadow. It's the part of the psyche we deny, reject, and exile. Childhood shame, unprocessed trauma, repressed rage. But here's the thing. What you push into the unconscious doesn't disappear. It festers, and it shows up in your relationships, your addictions, your self-worth. This is where the plant becomes mirror, not medicine. When used consciously, it brings the shadow forward not to punish you, but to liberate you. At Johns Hopkins and UCLA, modern studies confirm what shamans and temple priests knew all along. Cannabis-assisted therapy can unlock deeply buried memories and emotional trauma, but only when paired with a safe environment and a guide or intention. In other words, the context creates the transformation. Light up in a crowded club, you might spiral, but enter ritual breath and stillness and the plant becomes a spotlight, not on the outside world, but on the locked basement of your own psyche. And this is why it can feel terrifying, not because the plant is dangerous, but because your honesty is. Radical honesty with the self can feel like death, because it is a kind of death, the death of denial, the death of narratives, the death of the masks you forgot you were wearing. But here's the miracle. Every time you meet a shadow with awareness instead of resistance, it loses its grip. And cannabis, when used with reverence, slows the mind just enough for you to see the emotional loops that normally run on autopilot. It gives you space to respond instead of react, to feel without fleeing, to sit with discomfort and ask, why are you really here? And that question, if asked with presence, becomes the turning point. Because in that space, trauma stops being a prison and becomes a teacher. You begin to understand that your darkest experiences weren't random. They were initiations. And when you can revisit them with clarity, compassion, and the softened gaze that cannabis makes possible, something alchemical happens. You rewrite the memory. You stop being the victim of your past and become the witness. You stop clinging to the pain and start mining it for gold. You stop saying, why me? And start saying, thank you. That is shadow integration, and it's what every true mystic must undergo, because you can't hold the light without first making peace with your darkness. Cannabis, if used right, is one of the most powerful allies for this work, but it must be respected. It must be paired with intention, because without it, you're just amplifying confusion. You're just looping pain without processing it. That's what happens to the 97%. They touch the door of insight but never step through. But you're not here for a high. You're here to wake up. And to do that, you must see clearly not just the divine within you, but the distortion too. That's what the plant shows you first, because it knows. Before you can activate the third eye, you must purify the inner one. In almost every ancient culture, there's a symbol of a single all-seeing eye. The eye of Horus, the Ajna chakra, the pine cone staffs of the Sumerians and Romans. Even the back of the US dollar bill whispers the same message. There is an eye that sees beyond the physical, not with vision but with knowing. Today we call it the pineal gland, but to the mystics it was the third eye, the antenna of intuition, the gateway to direct spiritual insight, and cannabis was one of its ancient activators. Modern neuroimaging shows that cannabis increases cerebral blood flow to regions around the pineal gland. Users often describe this as a pressure in the forehead, a tingling, or even a sense of expansion. But beyond sensations, what really matters is what this region governs. Deep dream states, symbolic thought, pattern recognition, and a sense of inner vision. It's what lets you close your eyes and still see. Not images, but meaning. That's why cannabis in the right setting doesn't just make you relaxed, it opens a different kind of perception. Symbols carry more weight. Music becomes narrative. Faces seem to reveal emotions you'd otherwise miss. You start noticing connections, seeing signs, feeling synchronicities. Some dismiss this as delusion, but the ancients believed this state wasn't hallucination, it was a lifting of the veil. Because what is intuition really? It's the part of you that knows without needing to analyze. It's the voice that whispers truth before your logic can drown it out. It's the gut feeling that keeps you safe, the subtle nudge that guides your path, the dream that shows you what your waking eyes refuse to see. And cannabis, used correctly, makes that voice louder. That's why it was used before oracles gave prophecy, why mystics consumed it before dream incubation rituals, why seers like the Sibyls and Delphic priestesses used smoke to enter trance. These weren't party tricks. They were accessing layers of reality your normal senses are too limited to perceive. Today, we're seeing this again in data. Clinical reports show that cannabis enhances dream recall, emotional symbolism, and non-linear thinking. And when paired with practices like journaling, meditation, or divination, the plant becomes a portal, not just inward but upward. You begin to access archetypal space, mythic insight, the same realm Carl Jung mapped with his theory of the collective unconscious, the shared symbols and stories embedded in all humans waiting to be remembered. And if that sounds abstract, don't worry, because it's also practical. You start trusting your instincts more, making decisions faster, picking up on energy that others miss. You begin to live from a deeper place of alignment, not because the plant is telling you what to do, but because it's helping you hear your own voice beneath the noise. But again, it only works if you approach it with reverence. Scroll TikTok while you smoke and you'll amplify distraction. Sit in silence and breathe. You might receive a vision that changes everything. This is why the ancients weren't casual. This is why they treated cannabis like a sacrament, because they knew it was a key, but only if you brought the right lock. And this key, it doesn't just open the mind, it stirs the energy of the body too. That electric current running up your spine when you're fully present, that's not a side effect. That's a signal. A deeper awakening is trying to begin, and it starts where the mind ends, in the body itself. You felt it before but probably brushed it off. That rising warmth in your spine, the tingling in your hands, the pulsing between your brows. Maybe you thought it was just the weed, just some weird body high. But what if I told you that sensation is ancient? That it's the very sign mystics looked for when energy began to awaken? Across cultures, the same force is described in different tongues. In India, it's Kundalini, the coiled serpent at the base of the spine. In China, it's Qi. In the Andes, Sami. In Kabbalah, the Shekinah. Different names, same truth. Your body is wired for electricity, not metaphorically, literally. Your nervous system is bioelectric. Every thought, every feeling, every movement is an electrical event. And cannabis? It increases that conductivity. Modern studies now show that cannabinoids amplify electrical signaling across synapses and increase blood flow throughout the nervous system. Some reports suggest up to a 30% increase in conductivity when cannabis is consumed in a parasympathetic, restful state. That means more energy can flow, more signals can travel, more information, not just mental but spiritual, can move through the system. And that's exactly what the yogis were doing thousands of years ago. They weren't getting high. They were activating the body's dormant systems. When cannabis was combined with breathwork, band haze, internal locks, and meditative focus, it acted as an amplifier, not of chaos but of flow. Energy that was once stuck in trauma patterns or blocked in dense emotions started to rise. That's the warmth, the tingling, the feeling of something ancient coming online. This is why many report spontaneous movements, emotional releases, or even weeping during deep conscious cannabis rituals. It's not the plant making you emotional. It's the release of years, lifetimes of stored tension and memory. When energy moves, emotion follows. Emotion, literally emotion, is energy in motion. The danger? When this starts happening without guidance or context, people get scared. They think something's wrong. They resist. And that resistance creates fragmentation. This is the shadow side of modern cannabis culture, intensifying energy with no map, no ritual, no integration. We're waking the dragon with no idea how to ride it, but when done right, it becomes the most sacred healing, because the body stores everything the mind can't process. And energy work isn't about adding something new, it's about removing what's blocking what's already there. Through the right rituals, slow movement, intentional breath, stillness, you start to feel the current that animates you, the spark that doesn't come from caffeine or motivation or willpower, but from something far deeper. Life force, creative essence, the divine within form. And this isn't new age fantasy, it's biochemistry, electromagnetism, and spiritual reality all in one. You are not meant to be tired all the time. You are not meant to feel disconnected. That's not adulthood. That's disconnection from your own current. Cannabis, if honored, can help restore that connection. But let's be clear, energy isn't always comfortable. When it rises, it clears. And that clearing can look like headaches, sweating, emotional waves, or vivid dreams. But those aren't side effects. They're signals. It's working. You're awakening. But here's the hard truth the ancients always warned about. Any tool powerful enough to heal can also harm. And cannabis is no exception. Because if you don't respect the power dulls. Let's talk about the trap most people fall into, the spiritual death that looks like chill vibes, but slowly disconnects you from everything that matters. This is where most people fall asleep with their eyes open. They tell themselves, it's just a plant. It helps me relax. It's natural, so it must be good. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, what began as a doorway becomes a dead end. What started as a spark becomes a sedative. Because here's the truth they don't want to hear. Even sacred tools become poison when used unconsciously. The ancients warned us. They wrote it into their myths, their rituals, their medicine. In Ayurveda, cannabis was classified as a potential rasayana, a rejuvenator, but only under strict ritual use. The Taoists called it the herb of immortality, but paired it with years of breath training and sexual energy control. Even in Rastafari, which modern culture treats as a joke, there were clear guidelines. No idle talk, no indulgence, only meditation and reasonings. Because without discipline, cannabis doesn't reveal the divine, it distorts it. And now, neuroscience agrees. Frequent, casual cannabis use, especially without intention or ritual, leads to dopamine desensitization. That means your brain's reward system dulls. You stop feeling motivated. You stop being curious. You become emotionally flat. You laugh, but you don't feel joy. You function, but you don't live. This is the trap. You think you're okay because you're not suffering, but you're also not growing. And that is spiritual death. Cannabis, like all amplifiers, doesn't just raise your highs, it deepens your lows. If you're escaping your life, it'll help you do that better. If you're avoiding your purpose, it'll make that easier. It won't fight you. It will assist you in staying asleep while making you think you're awake. This is the paradox. It's a plant that opens doors to the divine, but only if you're ready to walk through them. Otherwise, it becomes just another loop, another distraction wrapped in the costume of spirituality. And that's where the 97% live, lighting up to scroll, lighting up to binge watch, lighting up to silence the thoughts they should be listening to. And then they wonder why they feel numb, why their dreams feel further away, why their soul whispers less and less. It's because you're training yourself to ignore it. And none of this means cannabis is bad, it means it's powerful. And power without direction becomes decay. That's why the ancients respected it. Why they used it once a moon, not 3 times a day. Why they paired it with integration, not distraction. Because they knew the plant doesn't owe you anything. It mirrors you. And if you treat it like a crutch, it will keep you crawling. But if you approach it like a teacher, it will awaken something eternal. So how do you return to that path? How do you reclaim the sacred in a world that sells sedation? How do you make the shift from user to initiate? You learn the law of memory because the body remembers the states you touch, and what you experience in presence can be accessed again in stillness, even without the plant. That's what the 3% understand. And in the next part, we'll show you how. Here's what no one tells you. The most powerful thing cannabis does isn't what happens during the high. It's what gets encoded after. Neuroscience calls it state-dependent learning. The idea that your brain stores memories in the exact emotional and energetic state you were in when you experienced them. Which means, when you use cannabis to reach a high awareness state with intention and then integrate it properly, you train your body and brain to return to that state naturally. No substance required. Let that sink in. You don't need to keep lighting up to go back. You just need to remember. Because once your nervous system knows what expanded consciousness feels like, it can recreate it. That's not mysticism, that's neuroplasticity. That's the real secret hidden in every ancient mystery school. Experience plus integration equals transformation. Most people never integrate. They have a powerful realization during the high and then jump straight back into distraction. Phone, food, noise. They never pause, never write it down, never breathe it in. And so, the state dissolves. The insight becomes foggy. The feeling becomes a memory and the brain tags it as not real. But if instead you anchor the insight through journaling, breathwork, or even just sitting in stillness after the experience, your body begins to record it as true, as baseline. And that's the whole point. Cannabis is not meant to be a wheelchair for the soul. It's meant to be a training ground, a glimpse, a reminder. This is what clarity feels like. This is what oneness feels like. This is what peace sounds like in your nervous system, and once you know it, you can find it again. Sober, in nature, in meditation, in your breath, even in pain. This is how the ancient initiates used the plant. They didn't rely on it, they learned from it. Each ritual wasn't an escape, it was a lesson. Here's how your soul speaks when your ego is quiet. Here's what your purpose feels like when you stop chasing noise. Here's what divine presence tastes like. Now go find it without me. That's the energy of a true teacher. And that's what cannabis is supposed to be. This is why we created our free newsletter where we share the deeper knowledge we can't publish on platforms like YouTube. For a limited time, you'll also receive a copy of our ebook, a legendary hermetic text that maps consciousness itself. Hit the link in the description and join us there, because this is the shift from consumer to conscious explorer, from dopamine-driven habits to divine remembrance. It's not about becoming dependent on the plant, it's about learning how to listen to what it was pointing to all along. So when the 97% say, "I can't feel anything without weed," you'll smile, because you'll know the truth. You brought the state with you. You don't chase highs, you carry light. This was never about getting high. This was about remembering. remembering that you're not just flesh and thoughts and routines, you are awareness itself, wrapped in sensation, guided by rhythm, encoded with divinity. Cannabis was never meant to add something to you. It was designed to reveal what's already there. And the tragedy of the modern world is not that people use it, it's that they use it to forget instead of remember. The Egyptians knew this, the Vedic sages knew this. Even the early Essenes and Gnostics whispered of sacred herbs that could thin the veil, but they never stopped there. The plant was the initiation, not the identity. You didn't become a priest by smoking. You became one by what you did after, how you walked, how you served, how you lived. This is the final lesson Thoth encoded. The ritual is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle of reverence. Because when you treat life itself as the ceremony, the plant becomes optional. You can breathe the way you did that night. You can sit with yourself in silence like you did when the visions came. You can remember what it felt like to feel whole, and then build your life around that. That's how the 3% live. Not relying on cannabis to activate them, but thanking it for showing them the way and then walking that path with clarity. This doesn't mean you never touch the plant again. It means you no longer need it to feel aligned. You've trained your nervous system to access presence. You've metabolized your insights. You've rewired your relationship to the divine, and you've remembered the real substance is you, your breath, your presence, your attention, your choices. So now the question isn't, should I quit weed? It's, am I using this as a doorway or a distraction? Is this opening me or dulling me? Am I moving closer to truth or just floating above my pain? Because you can lie to your friends, you can lie to your timeline, but you cannot lie to the plant, and you cannot lie to your soul. It always knows. So if something inside you stirred during this video, good. That's the point. Not to shame you, not to tell you what to do, but to remind you what's possible. You're standing at the doorway now, and only you know what happens next. Join our free newsletter to go deeper than YouTube allows. That's where we explore the real esoteric work, plus you'll get a digital copy of our ebook for free. You already know this path is calling, now go walk it. If you feel this on a deep level, comment, "I get the code."